fairly concrete with the shared definition of family partnership across the early childhood system. And so I thought we could touch base on that, see if that still feels like something we'd consider putting into a recommendation, and then also see if anything else stands out. Are there any questions before we jump right in? Okay, great. Clayton, can you give me permission to screen share, please? Thank you. Okay, can you all see the Jamboard? Perfect. So again, where we left in October is this pink posted over here is the developed common definition of family partnership. That the reason it's in pink is that seemed to be something people felt like was a little bit more of a formed idea. So it's just off to the side for that reason. We have several other ideas that were discussed. I know we had a pretty robust discussion around how can we help families connect to resources more? How can we help them navigate the system and just make it a little bit easier? So certainly we can continue having a conversation about that if anything comes up as a potential recommendation. I would say, there will be time to develop additional recommendations. So as we talk today, I would think about what do you feel good about putting forth today? And that if it's one, that's completely fine. If it's more, even better. But if something feels like this is an idea I'd like to discuss, but I'm really not ready to formalize it into a recommendation, just know that there will be time and space to hold it and continue the conversation. I think it's worth doing that if that feels like the idea just needs to be fleshed out a little bit more. And then I would also keep in mind, and you saw the template, we'll walk through those questions. I think it's kind of finding the sweet spot of it's a formed idea, but we don't need to worry too much about like what does implementation look like, or we don't need to be worrying about like if money is needed, where that's coming from, or who exactly is going to do it. It's really, we recommend putting this idea forth, and then there will need to be more conversations about what it would actually mean to put it into place. So I'm going to give everybody just a minute to kind of reorient to these ideas and see if anything else stands out. Before we do that, I added one post-it right before we came on that I do want to share. And this is an idea that has been, it's come up in a couple conversations, and I shared it with Heather and Cora from KDHE who are with us, and Gail and Crystal, and just not necessarily as a recommendation, but just to put this idea out for discussion. One thing we've heard in the Family Advisory Council and the Family Leadership Team, and I think I would imagine probably many of you have heard if you have conversations with families a lot, is kind of the sense of survey fatigue, and that a lot of people are getting surveys. I think we can all relate to that. That is certainly not an early childhood issue alone. I know in the conversations I've been in, it's kind of like they're coming from everywhere. And so this idea came up of, is there a way we could, as an early childhood system, be thinking about that differently and trying to kind of reduce the survey fatigue, but also like how many of our partners are asking similar questions that we may be asking in surveys, and we don't necessarily have a great way to know that. And so this very unformed idea of, could there be something like an annual Kansas early childhood survey where system partners come together and put a survey together basically to identify what are shared data needs that likely would not replace all survey needs. Certainly, within each grant or project, there are unique needs, but are there common pieces of information that could be collected within one survey to just help families not get quite as many? And then also, could that be an opportunity for system partners to really come together and be able to access information and understand what other people are collecting? So I put that on the list for consideration. We can do whatever the group feels, if that's something we'd like to explore in the future, if that's something we want to talk about today. But with that, I will give everybody a minute or so to take a look at the board and see if anything jumps out for a recommendation today.
So Megan, just to clarify, I know, for example, if we decided we wanted to make a recommendation around develop common definition of family partnership, is that something that we would actually, would we be developing that definition like right now, or that would just be we're developing a recommendation to do that?
That's a great question, Natalie. I would say no. I mean, I think so. There's a section on the template for like considerations. And I think if there are key elements or steps you would like to see, that would be worth noting in that part of the narrative. But no, I mean, the recommendation is, to me, a recommendation in this setting is really a formalization of an idea. But no, I do not feel like we have to come up with a definition of family partnership. I think that's something we could talk about, like who else would you want to be involved in that conversation? And we can list that in the considerations, or I could certainly see a role for this group moving forward if that is the recommendation we put forth, if it's approved, to just make sure that feels like it was the way you had intended it as it was written. But no, does that help clarify?
Yes, thank you. I was just thinking if we were doing that, there's a lot of research we need to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it would definitely not be done today.
I really appreciate the question. I think it's tricky when you're doing recommendations because you want them to be informed, and you don't want to, you want to have had a sufficient amount of conversation, but the goal is really like, we think this is important enough for somebody to be putting, hopefully several somebodies to be putting time into really developing it correctly.
When I read all of the little sticky notes, so many of them have to do with connection or connecting the dots. It just seems like that's a major theme here. And my mind goes to mapping, but I don't know. It just seems so overwhelming, but it just seems like a major theme here. Connecting families to resources and connecting providers to maybe those same resources.
I agree, Crystal. I think the word is on several of these sticky notes, and I would say, I mean, that's a big conversation, obviously, and that could mean a lot of things. But are there, recommendation? I think there's always a desire for it to be this big, really, impactful idea, but also sometimes those start with really small steps. And so I think about, are there things that maybe feel kind of minor, but putting them on paper as something that we could try across the system? I'm not exactly sure what that would look like. I don't know if that's like just some sort of, well, I don't know what that would look like, but I think there could be something small to test that could be worth a conversation. How do people feel about the common definition of family partnership? Does that still feel like something you would want to put into a recommendation today? Do you think we need to have more conversation.
This is Heather Staub. I think it's a great place to start. I think it's like a achievable springboard maybe for additional action. And so I think, along with that, it's a good, I think, conversation starter, perhaps, and kind of a mechanism to maybe stir additional action. Because I think it feels kind of small. And like you said, I'm sure a lot of us on this group would like to tackle things in a big way for families in Kansas. But I think a common definition of family partnership and having that come out of this group and be kind of linked in with the children's cabinet does send a message about value and importance and focus. I think it could be a good springboard for additional things to come. But I'm open to, hearing what other people think.
I personally don't think that unless we have that definition or those parameters, it's the first step to move forward. It says, Heather said, it's a springboard. You got to start somewhere. And if you develop a definition, it may need to be a living document from the standpoint that it may need to change as time goes on.
For the purposes of the recording, I can read Heather Smith's comment that she says, I think it's an important step to getting consistency across agencies so families feel valued, supported, and engaged. I recognize we all have our expectations and requirements from funders, and we clearly need to have our own spin. I agree with Heather Staub that this is sending the message that all agencies in the cabinet are committed to this. And is it Donna or Dana? Also says, I agree with Heather, taking a tiny bite first and then growing from there.
Megan, I was wondering if could we do that? This is our first recommendation, but then if we have one that we say this is our second recommendation. So in order of how we want to work on them, priority wise, if we have another one that's really standing out, as we know that this is also needs to happen pretty quickly, but it can't happen until we have the common definition kind of thing.
That's a great question. Yes, I think we can note that if we do want to put a second, fourth. I think also if I would say, because we'll have more time to do the chair out at the end of the meeting, and obviously the focus of that will be on the actual recommendations, but I think it's okay to say here are some of the other things we're thinking about, but we think it's very important to start with this. So absolutely, I think however the group wants to frame that.
Megan, this is Nikki. I was thinking, I wonder if we do plan to work on a definition of family partnership, if we start with a broad definition, but then I kind of wonder if that framework or definition or best practices might have to be altered depending on who the families are having that relationship with. Because, we're talking about childcare providers, what are we going to use the definition for? We're probably going to use it for future work. So maybe eventually we might need to land on what best practices might look like for different groups, different audiences.
Yeah, I think that's
Nikki?
certainly something we could list in the considerations, and I think Heather noted this in the chat, but thinking about like, what if we move forward with this, whatever this definition would look like how do we ensure enough flexibility for people? Because certainly there are requirements within funding sources and programs and agencies, and just based on, what is best practice and who you're working with. And so I think figuring out how can we make sure that there is the flexibility for people to be able to like have this kind of umbrella definition, but then operate within their own maybe more narrow definition.
I'm also, this is Heather Staub, wondering if with that definition, the example they gave with the kindergarten readiness, they had like the toolkit and stuff. With the definition could come additional, materials eventually, like a white page that it has some data points about the value and the importance of family engagement and what that looks like and doesn't look like. I don't know, there's a lot of opportunity there, I think, to flesh that out more with some pretty simple. I don't think it would have to be really crazy. We don't have to do a whole toolkit yet. But I think that I do think it's a good springboard. And yeah, Nikki, I agree. I think that there's additional information that we could provide to help support entities to kind of know what this could mean for them, or how this could add value to the work that they are already doing.
That's you bring up though, I was looking, there have been a couple times on our Jamboard ideas around a one pager. So I think that's a great point for discussion. Or is there supplemental information that would be valuable to include with the definition? Another thing that has been talked about with the family leadership team a little bit is like, could we come up with kind of some system-wide, like, for lack of a better term, like core values related to family partnership? I think in addition to a definition, like, is there like kind of a commitment statement or something like that? So I think I think you raise a really great idea in terms of a definition. Is it sounds like we've got some consensus that a definition is a good place to start, but what else could accompany that either now or in the future? Does anybody not feel good about putting forth a shared definition of family partnership today? Okay, I think we've got consensus for at least one recommendation. I would thank you for whoever's adding to the board. That's helpful. I would propose, if you all are okay with this, going ahead and taking our break so that we can come back. We'll go back to the group at 10:50. So if we take a break now and then come back at like 7 past the hour, that'll give us a good 40 minutes to get through the template and then think about if there's other things we would like to share with the group. Sound good? Okay, we'll see you all in 10 minutes. Welcome back. Hope you had a nice little break. Okay. So here is our recommendations template. So I think we can walk through, and I will type as we go. And if I type anything that feels off base to you, please let me know. Typically how I do this is just kind of invite people to start sharing their ideas, and I'm happy to scribe, and then we can wordsmith as needed. Can everyone see this okay? Is this big enough font? Okay, great. So I think we can start with what we'd like to call our recommendation. I think one possibility is, recommends that I don't know if we want to say something like the Kansas Early Childhood System, or directly send it to the Children's Cabinet to develop a. I think the recommendation is the creation of a shared family definition of family partnership across the system. I think I'm not entirely clear who the actor that we need to specify is. I think we do present these to the Children's Cabinet, so I think we can do it that way and then figure out later, and we could put this in the considerations, like who should be part of the conversation about actually developing it. Does anybody have other thoughts on that?
I think that makes sense. That looks really good.
Does anybody not, any wordsmithing, or does this feel off to anybody? Before I go into the background information, because I think that'll take the bulk of our time, we did pull in 2 strategies that stood out to us that this fits under, but if others have additional, there are certainly several goals within the strategic plan that I think this could be a part of. But just so you know, it's currently has 2.2 and 3.2, we can always add. Okay. So here are the questions that we're going to try to answer together, and we can go in whatever order. Description of how considerations of equity have informed this recommendation, how Kansas families have shaped this recommendation, councils, committees, or work groups with expertise, experience, or jurisdiction related to the issue, why it's important to the system, who is impacted, and any additional connections. So I would propose that we can go through one by one and do some bullet points, and then we can clean it up after that. Anybody? I'm gonna skip ahead because I feel like this is the first question I would want answered, is why this recommendation is important for the Kansas early childhood care and education system. Does anybody want to? We've talked about that, but does anybody want to share their thoughts on that?
open to wordsmithing. This is Crystal Henry. I do feel like, families are the cornerstone of our children's development. So we need to recognize that here.
Also some language about families being the child's first teacher or first.
Natalie, that's exactly what I was going to say. That comes from your Head
Yay!
Start.
That's right.
Well, and they're their lifelong educators. It's not just that they're their first teachers. So, when they have a positive experience in early childhood, that carries forward. And their involvement or continued engagement carries forward if we are able to really develop that as they have young children.
This is Nikki. I'm wondering though, as we talk about this, whether we really should be describing why it's important that we develop the definition, not why family engagement's important, right? Because that will be part of the definition probably of family engagement, right? So I'm kind of thinking, well, it's really important that we all come from a place of shared understanding when we're trying to continue to develop the work. But I'm not great at wording. I always spend too much time trying to figure out how to word things, but I think we should be pointing out why it's important to have a shared definition.
I think you just said it.
Yeah, that looks great. I agree, Nikki, good idea. And good wordsmithing. Who's typing?
Megan.
Megan, good job.
Thank you. I will try to channel your thought processes as you're sharing.
And sorry if you just heard a weird squeal. I have a new baby puppy at my house. We're also in COVID lockdown. So I'm trying to keep him quiet, but he can be a little bit.
I mean, if you have to be in COVID lockdown, which I'm sorry to hear, I'm glad that you have a puppy with you.
It could be worse, right? It could be worse.
That should just come with being in a lockdown, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, any other thoughts on why this is important? Do we want to say something about like this is the first step? That theme keeps coming up.
Yeah, and I was also going to say it's the first step in developing the framework or expectations or whatever we want to say. Back to Nikki's point about for the professionals working in this world that we not only have a shared language, but we have a shared framework, shared kind of expectation of what we expect that to look like.
The word I always use in early learning is the foundation.
Yeah.
Of education. If you don't have the family engagement, you don't have the foundation for future. Foundation, perfect, Megan. I'm glad you can wordsmith.
I'm going to read what Mallory wrote in the chat just for purposes of the recording. She said to piggyback off of this conversation, mutual and equal partnership is important to empower families in this process. So somehow that, I guess, Mallory, what you're trying to say is that by developing a shared definition of family partnership, it helps it reinforce that it's an equal and mutual partnership that helps empower families. Okay, good. I'm glad and I apologize. I'm off screen, you all. I'm dealing with a little bit of a bloody nose. I didn't think you'd all want to see that. So but I am here.
I don't know if this is the correct wording, but I tried to put it into the first bullet at Larry's point. Okay, we can always come back, but for the sake of time, I think the who is this recommendation impacts families, and I think it impacts everybody across the system.
Hey, Megan, on this one and others, please chime in. But I wonder if also back to the point that we were talking about earlier is, who may be most directly impacted will be the providers of early childhood services. And so maybe we should call that out specifically. And I go back to the toolkit that they did for the kindergarten transition and how helpful that was. So our goal is to provide, guidance about how to do this best practice for early childhood providers. And so not that I don't like the really big picture of it, because it does have the big picture, but
Yeah, I think that's a good point, that it could be, and there can be layers of who's impacted. Does this feel specific enough in terms of who should adopt it? Does that feel correct?
I just wonder if we might want to soften the language a little bit to make it more of this is a resource for providers more than what they should do. Maybe it's its own bullet that they are impacted because again, need wordsmithing here, but this makes it easier for them to do this work. Yeah.
Anybody else on who's impacted? Okay. I know we're jumping around a little bit here, so we can work through these at the top. I think we can, this one should be relatively quick, I think. I'm going to start typing, but if you would like to add, just jump in.
I definitely think, yes. You've already got it, but the family, I just love the FAC has done a lot of work and is really ahead of the curve around things just like we talked about earlier today with stipends and things. So, and since they're made up of family members, I think it'd be really great to utilize their expertise.
This is Nikki. Megan, I don't know who all will be helping, but we're still working with Links to Quality, the QRIS development system, on the development of some of the links. And one of them is Family Partnership link. I know that they're using a lot of the other existing work groups and committees and stuff to help with, or they will be, because they're still looking at that. So I'm not sure whether to mention it here or not, but I think that some of the definitions and information and who and recommendations can be used for that development too.
So,
by the way, you're really good at reading.
yeah, I think we can, I think if it would feel more comfortable, because that's always hard if you want to call something out specifically or not, we could do like a more general statement around like an assessment of other initiatives. There are a lot of things happening with family partnership right now. It's certainly not, I mean, I think the FAC is a huge leader in it, but we know that it's a bigger conversation. So are you okay with more like a general statement of making sure there's connections? Okay, I think we have equity left, how Kansas families have shaped this recommendation, and then additional connections and considerations. Let's start with equity. Any thoughts?
I wonder, this kind of ties the last one in this together, but I wonder if pulling in either some folks from local interagency coordinating councils or the state interagency coordinating council, since those typically are very early childhood focused, because they have to be, and they for sure are birth to 3, but a lot of times like the state one goes birth through 5 or through kindergarten, but specifically around children with disabilities and developmental delays. And so I don't know exactly where we want to call that out, but I think that the state interagency coordinating council and the local council, since that is a statewide, those are in every community, might be a good place to either disseminate information or, to collaborate with.
Megan, I wanted to wait till you were done typing. On the equity part, I know that like with Office of Child Care and your PDG funds, there's technical assistance available on anything that's developed to do an equity review. And I think we might want to, whatever we develop, send it through those experts.
So I'm looking at the strategic plan, and 3.2, it says build a culture throughout the early childhood care and education system that respects and strengthens family voice. And I feel like doing this is kind of rooted in that strategy. Like we can't get there unless we're using common language as, we've been saying this is kind of like a springboard. So in effort to get there, we need to have our common language built first. It's maybe a reach, but I will say within that strategy is an action step of promoting the Kansas Family Engagement and Partnership Standards for early childhood. So it feels like that's in alignment with what we're recommending.
Megan, I'm thinking as we're talking about how important the family voice is, it might be important once we kind of develop this, whoever develops this definition, that we do get that input from the families on the actual definition of family engagement.
Yes, I agree with that. So ensuring that there's like a feedback loop once something's developed. Is that what you're thinking? Okay, yes, I will add that. I also want to share Mallory's comment in the chat. With equity, connections to the array of resources within their communities and their access to all supports and all services and supports. Well, I don't know if I I tried to capture some of that, but I don't know if I got all of it. So if there's other wording you'd like on this, feel free to put it in the chat. Do we want to say that families should co-create the definition?
Yeah, I think we want to be really careful while we're making this, that we're following best practices ourselves. Otherwise, whew. So yeah, I think, you know, working with folks like the FAC really helps us in that endeavor, since that's solely made up of family members. But I think calling it out is important, because nothing about us without us, you know, that whole.
I'm going to share Mallory's statement again. I think that previous language from parent involvement to family and community partnership signifies a potential intent toward genuine co-creation of early learning programs and opportunities with an intentional elevation of family voice too. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, love it. I mean, it is it's beyond just having parents involved in, attending, for example, parent teacher conferences, or, volunteering in the classroom. It's really being more intentional about taking it that step further.
We got some agreement on that. Is there any recommendations for how to put that in here?
I wonder if it's, maybe it goes under the how Kansas families have shaped this recommendation, and how, I mean, really how we hope that they shape it in the future. Your next little bullet there, Megan.
that. So there's alignment with the teams.
I'm kind of wondering if we move this down below as well and then use that as like.
Mallory, you and I apparently are on the same
You
wavelength
really
today.
are. I'm having trouble thinking of how to word this, so I welcome any thoughts on how else we can, because I think it's a great point, Mallory. I'm just having trouble getting it onto the paper.
I mean, could we include that we think an important part of the definition should include family and community partnership? I mean, those exact words. I mean, I know that there's going to be more people that work on this, but if we all feel that that's an important piece of the definition, should we actually just call that out and say that we think that that should be a part of the definition? I don't know where that goes on here, but.
I think one place it could go is there's like a kind of additional connections and considerations. So that
Yeah,
might
there
be
you
a
go.
good spot for it.
Yeah.
I'm going to just put a holding place for it now and then we'll come back. Got about 9 minutes, but I think we're in a pretty good spot. So in terms of the families, because I think that's our last piece up here, I think we could again say, you know, work with the Family Advisory Council, Family Leadership Team, and other groups of family representatives. I mean, I agree that we want to make sure we're being careful about best practices moving forward. And we certainly do have some family representatives in this group. So if we want to call that out as well.
The findings from the needs assessment, you know, families identified inconsistent messaging, inconsistent awareness, not knowing what's available, not having equitable access. So
they did tell us that
especially
essentially. Yeah. Yeah, they did tell us that through the needs assessment. Good point, Crystal.
the strategic plan says Kansans told us there is inconsistent awareness of the importance of early childhood and the critical role parents and caregivers play in their child's development.
Does that feel sufficient?
You had head nods if you didn't see them.
What was that?
Crystal said you had head nods if you didn't see
Oh,
them.
sorry. Yeah, sometimes it's hard with multiple screens to track it all. Okay, perfect. Okay. additional connections within the system, as well as additional considerations for review and potential implementation. I mean, I think one thing we could maybe say with the family and community partnership is like, well, a couple things come to mind that we talked about for considerations. One, I think building in enough flexibility, just recognizing that people do have other definitions they have to operate under for different reasons. But also kind of that this is an opportunity to really set the tone for how the system wants to talk about and commit to family and community partnership moving forward. So I'm still struggling with how to put the family and community partnership in, but I feel like that might be one way, but I want to make sure it's the right tone for the group.
I don't know if it's more narrow, such as more more detail,
I forgot that was a word.
narrower. Hey, Megan, are you going to send this to, will you be sharing it while we're talking in the larger
I
group?
can,
Or-
yeah, either way I can send it to you, or I'm happy to screen share.
Okay.
I also, and I'm just going to note this, but given the time, I'm not sure if other people will put this like more into a narrative and not have it bulleted out. So I'm going to leave it bulleted out. And then depending on what the other groups do, I can clean it up. And I know they're going to send it out so that everybody has time to like sit with it, come back in January and have a little more time. So don't worry about like, unless something stands out as like, I really don't want this right now, there will be time for feedback. Any,
Don't know.
we're getting on the last 2 minutes.
Yeah, if you could send it to Crystal and I, since we're going to tag team reporting out, and then I
Sure.
don't know if time wise, if we'll have enough time to actually screen share and go through the entire document, or if they just want a high level overview of what the recommendation is. But
I think you're going to have more time than normal. So I'd see what other groups do, but my tip, I would say typically in other groups that I do this with, normally it's a screen share. So I think we can just see.
Yep.
Okay, before we break, I want to make sure we get this last point in.
I know we're racing time. I feel like on the equity piece, we should call out just an intentionality in providing representation. I'm thinking about all of our different types of families and grandparents who, are primary caregivers, and families with two moms and families with two dads, and, all types of families we want to make sure are represented in this process.
So perhaps something about diversity within the population, within the representation, maybe.
How's that feel?
Can we maybe change family? I don't know, change the word situation. I feel like situation
Oh,
kind
yeah.
of has like a
That's
negative
bad connotation.
Yeah.
Dynamic?
But I don't have like a brilliant
Structure?
Dynamic or composition? I don't know.
Composition.
yeah.
I like compass. Yeah, good. Thank you for calling me on that. Okay. Any final thoughts? Do we feel like we captured the, the family community partnership, I think. it could
I
be
say
better.
kudos. This had to be pretty fast and furious, and we know it's a springboard. So
It is. It is.
I think this is a meaty enough for us to have a lot of good things to think about and ponder and work on from here. I think everybody did a really good job of getting this much out and down in this amount of time.
I agree. I know we got to jump back, so I'll be quick, but I really just want to say thank you so much. I know I fully understand if anybody feels at all like I would love to do more, but know that this not only is this a springboard for the system, but I think this is a springboard for the group. And I really look forward to continuing the conversation with you all. And I think this is a huge first step. So I commend all of you and really appreciate your intentionality in putting this together. All right, I will send this to Crystal and Gail, and then we'll see you in the main room. Thank you all.